We're going to take a look at scientific theories and pseudoscience. A scientific theory is just an explanation for natural observations that is broad in scope. So that's really different from a hypothesis, which is much more narrow in scope. And scientific theories are supported by overwhelming evidence obtained by repeated experimentation, and they're also testable. So let me give you an example of a difference between a hypothesis and a theory. So here we've got a hypothesis that says coat color camouflage protects mice from predators. So that's pretty narrow in scope. But here we've got a theory. So we've got the theory of evolution by natural selection. And it says evolutionary adaptations arise by natural selection. So that's really broad in scope. And there's actually been a lot of experiments that have been done, and a lot of evidence has been accumulated to support the theory of evolution by natural selection. So you can see there's a pretty big difference between a hypothesis and a theory. So a hypothesis is much more narrow in scope, and a theory is much broader, and there's a lot more evidence to back it up. Unfortunately, there's a difference in meaning between the everyday use of theory and the scientific use of the word theory. So everyday use of theory, that connotes like a guess. So if I say I have a theory of why my friend is always late to meet me, that means I have a guess of why they're always late. So it doesn't mean I have a lot of evidence, I've done experiments and all that. So it's a very different connotation than the scientific theory. Whereas a scientific theory means that, there's been lots of experiments done, we've got lots of evidence supporting the scientific theory. So unfortunately, for lay people, when they see a scientific theory, they think, oh, it's just a guess. But to scientists, it's not a guess. We're saying we've got a lot of evidence to back this up. And then we also have a scientific law, whereas a scientific theory is going to explain how or why something happens. A scientific law is going to describe what happens. So an example of a scientific law would be like the law of gravity. So, like an apple is going to fall from the tree. So that would be the law of gravity. And a lot of times these scientific laws will have a mathematical formula that can be used to predict what will happen. So those are scientific laws, and that's how they're going to be different than a scientific theory. Okay, then we come to pseudoscience. Pseudo means false, so this literally means false science. So pseudoscience is just statements, beliefs, or practices that claim to be scientific but are incompatible with the scientific method. So they don't stand up to scientific scrutiny, that if you went through the scientific method, they just would not be supported. So pseudoscience is often characterized by vague claims. Maybe they're exaggerated claims, and a lot of times they're going to be untestable, or you can also describe it as unfalsifiable claims. And there's also a lack of openness to evaluation by other experts. So if somebody has a pseudoscience statement, belief, practice, or whatever, they're not going to want to have, scientific experts come in and try to test their claims or beliefs or practices. Here's just some examples of pseudoscience. There's a lot more out there, but astrology would be one. So like reading your horoscope, that's pseudoscience. That's a pretty old one. The flat earth theory it's definitely not a theory. We know that the Earth is not flat from all the scientific evidence we have, but this is pseudoscience. Acupuncture, there's not a lot of scientific evidence for this one either. There's a lot of miracle cures out there that they claim, that they're going to cure you, in 5 days, and you'll be all better, and probably don't believe those claims because there's very few miracle cures out there. But that's probably going to be pseudoscience as well. Vaccines causing autism, that's also pseudoscience. The scientists that published the paper that said that the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine that he said that caused autism, he actually falsified his data and was being paid by a vaccine manufacturer, and they actually retracted his paper, and he wouldn't go back and repeat his results or anything, and he actually had his medical license taken away because of what he did. And there's been dozens of scientific studies that have been done subsequently, and they have shown that vaccines do not cause autism. So that was a very unfortunate thing that happened with pseudoscience. Intelligent design is also pseudoscience. This is the belief that a supernatural force created life, designed life, and there's just no scientific evidence of that, and this ignores some of the evolutionary theory as well. Okay, and there are some limitations to science. So science can't be used to explain the supernatural or religious beliefs. So things like angels, ghosts, spirits, science cannot be used to address those things. So if you have this hypothesis here, like going back to the flashlight not working, and if your hypothesis was that invisible, undetectable elves are making the flashlight not work, that's not a very good hypothesis because you can't test that because the elves are invisible and undetectable. So how could you show whether that's true or not? Because you can't detect these invisible elves. So there are some limitations with science where it's just not applicable to religious beliefs or supernatural things. Science just can't be used in those areas.